Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, we are delighted that the MIDF Green Conference 2023 this year returns to an in-person event, and we thank you for joining us. Today we look to shake things up, challenge the status quo, and turn words into actions as we deliberate on a range of pressing issues across the spectrum of environment, social, and governance. To set the context and priorities for the conference today, I'm pleased to invite Dato Charon Wardini, Group Managing Director of MIDF, for his opening remarks. Dato Charon, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh, and good morning, everyone. To those who missed the Minister just now, may I bid you welcome to the MIDF Green Conference. We started this conference 4 years ago in 2019 when very few local banks were talking about green finance, sustainability, ESG, or the carbon economy. And this is our first in-person conference since the pandemic. It was an honor just now to have YB Tuan Nik Nazmi Nik Ahmad, the Minister for Natural Resources, Environment and Climate Change, to address us this morning before he headed off to attend Parliament. Ladies and gentlemen, we now have a Minister for Climate Change, and it is good that we do. This is a hugely important issue for the country. How do we balance the international pressures on us to decarbonize and be more environmentally aware with our own national priorities, and the reality that as a small nation, our contribution to the carbon dioxide and other so-called greenhouse gases in the atmosphere is negligible compared to the bigger or richer nations. Our biggest exports are oil and gas, palm oil, electrical and electronics, and tourism. And none of these are particularly green. Oil and gas are fossil fuels. Oil palm supposedly cause deforestation. E&E factories need power and water, and most of our power comes from burning coal or gas, and water is a scarce natural resource. Tourism means flying tourists in on jets that burn fossil fuels. On top of that, our biggest spending is on subsidies for petrol, diesel, and energy. We pay money to oil companies so our people can afford to burn more fossil fuels. Should we give all this up? Or, since we can't, without ruining our standard of living and giving up the economic development that was so hard-earned, what do we need to do to square the circle? These are hard questions that we face, and we need clear government policy and legislation. And I'm delighted that the Minister mentioned the Climate Change Act, as it is a very, very welcome development in this regard. Internationally, we see that the Europeans have strict laws and regulations on carbon emissions and the environment, whereas this is not the case in many of the states of the USA, where coal mines and coal-powered power plants are quite welcome. Our policies on climate and decarbonization are currently made by many different regulators and government agencies, and not just by the Ministry of NRECC, which hopefully it will be in the future. The financial regulators, for example, have come up with policies on ESG and carbon that financial institutions and listed companies need to abide by, like the Europeans. Now, Jerome Powell, who chairs the US Federal Reserve, however, said this at the Symposium on Central Bank Independence in Sweden earlier this year. And I'm quoting him now, addressing climate change seems likely to require policies that would have significant distributional and other effects on companies, industries, regions, and nations. Decisions about policies to directly address climate change should be made by the elected branches of government and thus reflect the public's will as expressed through elections. Without explicit congressional legislation, or in the case of Malaysia, parliamentary legislation, it would be inappropriate for us, i.e. central banks, to use our monetary policy or supervisory tools to promote a green economy. We are not and will not be a climate policymaker. Which I think I agree. I mean, it's not the place of regulators to do this. It must come from the government, and which is why the Climate Change Act is so crucial. So in today's conference, we'll try to unpack these issues and other issues and try to answer some of these hard questions. The first panel has Dato Amran Hafiz, Executive Director of Khazanah Nasional, our sovereign wealth fund that owns Tenaga Nasional, which produces most of its power through burning fossil fuels. Mr. Philip C., Group Chief Sustainability Officer of Malaysian Aviation Group, a subsidiary of Khazanah Nasional that owns Malaysian Airlines, whose business model is to burn fossil fuel in the upper atmosphere and charge people for doing so. And Mr. Yin Xiaolong, a senior research associate at the Khazanah Research Institute, who studies and understands the big economic policy issues at stake. It will be fascinating to find out how our giant companies aim to tackle the opposing pressures of making profits and saving the planet. Our second panel will be more down to earth. We have Encik Rizal Naini, the CEO of SME Corporation, which, as its name suggests, is a government body that looks after SMEs. Mr. Callum Chen, Chairman and Chief Executive of LH Plus, as well as President of the Malaysian Consortium of Mid-Tier Companies. And Mr. Max Lee, the Chief Executive Officer of Panta Solutions, that provides ESG solutions to SMEs. And they will discuss what businesses, especially small and medium enterprises, need to do so as to comply with the ESG requirements put upon them. The third panel comprises Tuan Syed Ahmad Muzri, MD of Jaguar Land Rover, Haji Ahmad Farid, Project Director, TNB Power Generation, and Encik Alizan Mahadi, Senior Director at the Institute of Strategic and International Studies. And they'll discuss, among other things, electric vehicles and the transition to lower carbon sources of energy. We will then have a conversation with Dr. Weini Chen from Bursa Malaysia on the Bursa Carbon Exchange, which I'm sure will also include an explanation to all of you here of how a stock exchange can be a place to buy and sell carbon. Our final panel will be on water. How is it that we have one of the highest rainfalls in the world, yet we still have water shortages? Why are there floods all the time? Are we wasting clean water because it is too cheap? These and many other questions will be addressed by the panelists, who are Dato Paduka Engineer Haji Khezro, Chairman of Wetlands International Malaysia and DG at the Department of Irrigation and Drainage from 1997 to 2007, Dato Engineer Nur Hisham, Independent and Non-Executive Director of Pengurusan Aset Air Berhad, and also DG at the Department of Irrigation and Drainage from 2020 to 2021, and Encik Amran Awoluddin, Executive Director and Chief Operating Officer of Randhill Utilities, who runs water plants, to discuss about the issues with regards to water security. Moderating those sessions are my colleagues from MIDF and friends from EY and PwC. Ladies and gentlemen, I would like to thank our panelists and moderators for their time and willingness to share their knowledge and experience, and with all of us, and also to all of you for your participation and support. Thank you, and enjoy the conference.